The first one, the asking why.
Yeah, just if, oh, you were the only one. Yes. And Larry. And so these are the people that ask the why questions. They're always, uh, we're trying to focus their interest, and they're typically creative types. And then we had the second group, which about half of us was analytic. And what are analytics like? Just the facts, just the details. About 20% of the population, but about if you have a class like this where people don't have to take it, that'll be 50% of the class because they're drawn to classes and books. So just what's the information? Just the data. Number 3 was our common sense type of learning style, our how-to people. There were some of those, right? Yeah, just very, very how-to. How does this work? How do I use it? And then there was a few people that were in this dynamic learning style, which is what can this become? And there were just a few people there. It's a small percentage. Now here's the important thing is how does this relate to the lesson plan template that was hook, book, look, took? Who can relate those together? Right. And so as we're teaching, we have a hook that engages people, focuses people on the content that's coming. And those why people, they need that hook. And then you get right into the book part of the lesson, which is the content of the passage. What did the author intend to communicate in the verse? And that teaches to this learning style. And then I held up a mirror to people, and that was so they could take that internal look at themselves, see how does it apply to me. That's the common sense, the how-to people. And then finally, what is this lesson going to become? What's the accountability to carry it forward? And so the reason we're going through this hook, book, look, took for a lesson plan is because, not just because it's a clever way to do it, but because it hits every different learning style. It'll teach to the strength and it'll challenge every learning style in the area they need to be challenged in. Because the how-to people, they need to learn what the scripture says so they know what to apply. You can't apply what you don't know. The people who are just over here saying, what can this become? Well, they have to be challenged in practical ways, etc. So it challenges the whole person. That's the whole point behind why we have a hook, book, look, took, and the learning styles together. So that left us where we were getting into some methods. And if you look at the top of your page here, we have our aims. What we're hopefully going to try to aim at today is by the completion of this lesson, students will be able to choose methods that match their objectives by choosing aims to teach a verse. So, instructional aims, students will blank, and then how do we know they did it? Students will learn John 3:16 by memorizing it 5 times, or by reciting it 5 times, saying that they've memorized it. Or we will understand the doctrine of salvation by being able to explain it in paragraph form. What do we want students to do, and then how do we want them to demonstrate they're doing it? So that's the last few weeks, and now we get to last week. We had questions. How do we ask questions? So for some of you who took notes, what were some of the challenges in the way we ask questions? Right. So not answering your own questions, why would that be a problem? Yeah, that's a different one, multiple stacking questions. Yeah. All right. So I wanted to hit questions because all teaching is, so much of it has to do with questions. And we're going to take up one level by discussions. This was on, if you were here last week, you had this in your notes. It's just the same thing that was the bottom of the last page, so everybody's got it. So we'll do a little role play. We started the class with a role play that was fun. Who would like to be in our role play? Don't want to put anyone on the spot who I. Let's see. If I give you a sheet of paper, see, I want you to move to this table for a section. Got a piece of paper? Yeah, right here, just for the role play. There you go. Come on. Yeah, you're sitting over here. Hmm. Hurry up, swallow. All right. Everyone who has a sheet of paper can come to that table there. And we'll say this is a Sunday school class. And Christmas is coming up. And so they're going to discuss the Christmas story. So someone should be prompted to start the conversation in their note. And then we'll just go around the table a few times and see what develops and just notice what each person is contributing. And yeah, make sure you speak loud enough. So there you go.
All right, it is Christmas season. We are going to have a discussion about the virgin birth. Would love to hear what you all think about it.
Well, that reminds me of a time when I was a kid, back whenever I was going to church and we had this Christmas program and oh my god. And come on.
Who else? Anybody else?
You try to push this virgin. I was born around here.
Oh, just like those toys I got when I was a kid. You know. Yes. I didn't have those though, but I do remember that. Oh no, because then you've got to have all of the traditions, all of the Christmas traditions. There's so many. What's my favorite one? Oh, well, there's the making the cookies. You always have to make cookies every Christmas. It's true. True.
Great discussion.
Yeah, let's cut it back. We'll go to our, you all can come on back to your tables. All right. Well played. Those. All right. So that was course, designed, everyone played their role well. It was designed to be that way. And whenever we have discussions, there it's like the most convenient way to come together to figure out what's going on. You want to draw things out, you want people to participate, but there are challenges, and each person at the table represented tried to play out a different type of challenge we have whenever we have discussions. And we've all been in discussions like this where it's happened. Maybe not at this level, hopefully not at this level. And we've all been guilty of some of this at some point ourselves, probably. So we had first someone who we didn't hear from, right? Paul. And thought Paul was not being, what Paul's role was, he was supposed to not say anything. So that he did a good job. So he is what we might call a non-participant. And so how do you deal with the non-participant? Or is he a non-participant? How do we know he isn't participating? Yeah. Well, this is a tough one because, go ahead.
They're processed, but it's not connecting through.
Right.
But you have a granddaughter who can sit there and not move for the entire sermon, and then 5 minutes after you get in the car, she'll tell you everything that just went on for an hour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Doesn't mean not listening, and particularly for our analytics, especially in a discussion like that went this bad, our analytics typically aren't going to speak because, yeah, yeah. And you don't know, a lot of people are processing, and by the time they think through all the different ways they could approach what's being discussed, and then they are trying to read the room has moved on. So that's a challenge. And it's like, oh, I could have said this 5 minutes ago. It'd be good now. But so that's a challenge. So our non-participants or our silent people aren't always belligerently not participating. Sometimes they're just processing in a different way. When I started teaching courses online, it was my quietest students, my people who wouldn't talk in class, who became the most verbal online because they had time to collect their thoughts, think through everything, and they were typically the most articulate ones. Where in a discussion like this, you have your opposite end of the spectrum, which is your verbal processors, people who will just start talking and try to come up with what they're going to say as they're going. And that's a challenge. But how might we address someone to feel safe and encourage them to verbally participate in a discussion? What do you think could be done here? Okay. Uh-huh. Okay. You could. Now, you taught in military, right? Was that what your high school and military? Uh, um, some people, that's their biggest fear, that they would be called out individually. You can decide how and when you can do that. What are some other ideas to engage people that aren't? Yeah, Gabriel. Hmm. Right. You can be, because people are typically, they might not be participating because they don't know anything about it, or because they don't start with big, vague generalities, but you give them something specific and they might engage there. Some other things I might do for someone who isn't participating is to get with them in between classes or discussions and try to get to know them and find out why, because there can be several reasons why they're not participating verbally. And sometimes I'll have them say, hey, next week we're talking about the fruit of the Spirit. I know you happen to be a gardener. Could you talk to us about what it's like to till a garden, what it's like to take care of a garden? And then they've got some time to prepare and share that way. So there's usually they need some prompting ahead of time. It's the in the moment that's the challenge, not necessarily talking. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And you could even, if you had them write first, which helps the other ones as well, then they're usually they just have to read maybe what they wrote. So you could, yeah, collect those, read them yourself, or call on them after they've had to write. All right. As we go, some of these will overlap. Rabbit chaser. Do y'all know what that phrase means? Our younger people, what's a rabbit chaser? So the changing the subject, always going out. There was some of that going on. I think that was Terry. Terry's role was to, yeah, intentionally try to throw us off subject. And we'll assume that when we're in a discussion that people aren't doing this on purpose. In the youth group, they do it on purpose. In children's ministry, they do it without realizing it. And adults, I think, go back to childhood and do it without realizing again. And not being belligerent or smart alecks, but just they have something to share and they're always going in different directions. So, what are some things we might do to help prevent that? Yeah, the aim. Bring back to the aim. Um, yeah, or yeah, to get more specific with your questioning, or bring it back. Um, yeah, tighten up the discussion. Then there's this next one here. I have the word monopoly, the monopolizer in a discussion, someone who takes over. Again, it's not necessarily a belligerent thing or even a conscious thing. And so that was Dina, which was a struggle for, which was odd. So, but anyway, what would you do? How would you approach the person? And we've all been in that. And sometimes you might realize, oh, I've been doing all the talking, and so I'm monopolizing a discussion. Yeah, you could put the pressure on someone else. Yeah, a lot of times at the beginning of a discussion, I'll say, here's my ground rules. There must be two people to speak in between you and another so it doesn't become a dialogue, and we're going to keep our remarks down to 30 seconds. And sometimes just those two by themselves, the ground rules set will help it take off from there. Some one-word things you can write down. Reaction. Sometimes that lets the person know, okay, let's shift over here, and it also calls upon the students, the other rest of the group to chime in. Or who's next? Or response, or just a one-word prompt that helps. And again, sometimes you'll have to talk to that person later, and a lot of times this person needs someone to talk to. They just like, and you really need maybe more of a counseling situation than a classroom situation. Um, or thank you. Now someone else. So there's a lot of quick prompts. Um, and what Curtis mentioned, having people write down something first tends to slow that person down because the verbal processor needs to be slowed down verbally, and making them write will do that. Sometimes I'll put people in groups of two. Discuss this with I call it a neighbor nudge. Nudge your neighbor and talk about this for a minute, and then I'll call on the other person to share what they. All right. This last one here, or second to last one, heresy, I have. And so there's a lot of gray area in the scripture, but the Christmas story, virgin birth, seemed to be kind of challenged, right? Did y'all hear that? That it was being challenged. And so this is the other ones are group dynamics. This one is theological. It's dangerous in a different way. So on Terry. Terry, how would you handle, what's a way you might handle something where someone has said something that's obviously biblically inaccurate? Well, heresy's heresy, so yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Right. Hmm. 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 Yeah. I think it depends upon the severity of it. I think something like the virgin birth, you would confront that in the class. If there's a lot of gray area or possible denominational stuff that isn't maybe as big of a deal, it's like, is this real heresy? Or maybe it's wrong, but it's not that big of a deal to chase down in the class. This one, yeah. Well, I think that, yeah, then you would have to say, is there an agenda here? I think the first response is always that I say, well, what verse? Because usually people are repeating something they've heard. In this case, where did this person's source, what was the source of this heresy? Yeah, I saw this on the History Channel. So, and maybe they really believe that, or maybe they're just sharing something they saw, or maybe they're being persuaded. But what verse? So then it doesn't have to become a confrontational me versus you. It's both people going to the Bible and saying, what does it say? And hmm, yeah, right. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Hmm. And so this could be someone brand new, or it could be someone who just doesn't believe whatever. So yeah, but it definitely has to be addressed. I would address, a core belief definitely in the class. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So yeah. This last one here, the non-leading, like we had the leader, which was the role Jacob was playing, and he was intentionally supposed to not lead. He was supposed to just introduce the topic and kind of step back. And um, so, again, let's say Jacob, you're going to lead this group here, and you've already kind of have a hint of what you're going to encounter. What would you do differently, you think, starting this discussion? Everything different.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. 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 Sure. And, and so that's one reason why discussion as a method isn't always the best or only method to use all the time, given, like, if I were to ask about, hey, let's discuss the migratory patterns of the blue whale. It's like, well, I don't know anything about that. So we don't have anything to contribute because that's a very narrow point of study. So if I'm preparing a Bible lesson and I'm in the middle of Ezekiel or something like that, it's like, who knows the middle of Ezekiel really well? You know, maybe other methods have to come in first. I have to make sure people have some content before they're able to discuss. So sometimes just going in and saying, let's talk, that's good, but that might not be a good Bible teaching lesson. So because it assumes some background knowledge. Anything else on discussions you all can add? Yes, sir. Mm. Well, um, so I would, yeah, just follow up with questions about, does he trust you or does he, I guess, okay. Mm. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess you just keep praying, keep trying to connect, and yeah, who knows when when he might open up, if he will. Um, but right. Hmm. Right. Yeah, and I think that, yeah, trying to go through the lesson planning template to hit people in different ways, again, takes care of a lot of that. But people have to decide that, they have to be in on it. Well, there was a little boy, his dog was sick, and as he got back from the veterinarian, he told him, he said, your dog needs 2 tablespoons of this medicine every day or it's going to die. So the boy loved his dog, and he was home for the summer. His parents were at work, and when it was time to give him the medicine, he got the spoon out and the medicine, and he came to the dog. The dog came right to him, and he tried to give him the medicine. The dog wouldn't have anything to do with it. And so the boy tried again. He tried to hold the dog. He tried to trick the dog. He tried to various different ways to get the dog to take the spoon. And finally, the boy got really upset, and he tackled the dog. And it was a scuffle and a fight, and the medicine went flying, and the spoon went one direction. So the boy went over to the corner and started to cry. And then he hears something. He turns around, and it's the dog lapping the medicine up off the floor that is spilled. And then he realizes, oh, it wasn't the medicine that he didn't like. It was the spoon being shoved in his mouth. Okay? So when it comes to teaching, it's not always the content that's the challenge, but the method of delivery. That's the little story here, is we're going to hit stories. Everybody loves a story. It's the one cross-cultural method, I think, that hits everyone. So there's a couple blanks here to fill in. Lecture versus story. Oh, most people like a good lecture. People typically like stories as well. So lecture hits the head, story hits the heart in that blank. So you can think about this. A lecture, you got names. In a story, you have characters. In a lecture, you have context. In a story, you set a stage. A lecture is about precision. A story is about emotion. A lecture, what am I lecturing on here? Pearl Harbor. But in a story, it's just, when did the story I just told, when did that take place? It doesn't matter, does it? It makes no difference. What was the boy's name? Doesn't matter. And so, what city were they in? None of those things matter. In a lecture, all those things would matter because I'm going for precision and I'm trying to get content out to people. In a lecture, you list items or points. In a story, you just use props. In a lecture, you have transitions that hopefully are sequenced very well. What do you have in a story? Instead of transition, I have starts with a T. That's why we like stories. The twists. A story has a twist. That's a swoosh. Okay. Okay. And in a lecture, you have a good conclusion. Remember, or in a story, you have a climax. And so there's something about our brains that just wrap around a story in a way that it doesn't around a lecture. So given that, take a couple minutes at your tables and discuss, when is a story appropriate and what are the challenges in using them? When is it good to use a story? Maybe when is it not good to teach using a story? And what are the challenges using stories in teaching the Bible? All right. Take about 10 seconds and finish up. All right. Let's come back together and let's hear from our table in the back here, since that's where you got the microphone anyway. What can you tell us about using stories? Maybe what to look out for. Okay. Yeah. Mhm. Okay. Yeah. So a story is more intimate and relational. That what you're saying. Yeah. Anything else back there? That's a pro story, but any challenges with that? Oh, all right. Well, we'll move right up here. Mhm. Mhm. Right. Mhm. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a challenge of telling a story, because we had our story on the documentary that was very engaging that said, well, the virgin birth obviously didn't happen. So there's like we have to preserve the facts, and good storytelling can preserve facts and help our mind wrap around them in an engaging way. Any other when is a story appropriate and challenges to use them? Anybody else over here, this side? Hmm. Right. I think that's very well said that you have to know why you're telling the story. And the biggest challenge in small groups is that the stories are so natural and people are such natural storytellers that they take over and you become rabbit chasing stories and everyone has stories. So that's the main challenge, I think, is to keep the stories. So when you're teaching, it's like, oh, I've got a good story. And it's like, well, how does that tie in? And so when you read the Gospels and Jesus is telling all these parables and stories, it's amazing what he doesn't say, how he doesn't flesh out certain details, and he just has one, like you read this parable, and it's like, wow, he had one main point. He really hammered this home with the story, and it was appropriate just for that moment in that time to the people he was speaking to. So, impromptu, some people are just good storytellers, but that's the thing. It comes back to the aim. Why would I tell this story here? And what am I giving up by telling the story? What details need to be fleshed in? So, all right. Anyone else? Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Okay. So hopefully in your repertoire as you lead groups or you participate in groups, and the nice thing about stories is you don't have to be the leader to think about how can I share something through a story. Um, well, let's flip over here. I've got here written of the following methods, some, and the next few pages is just a list of possible different methods that you can use when teaching. And some of these, I didn't divide them all up because a lot of them overlap, but some are verbal, some are written, some are active, some help condense information, and then there's something that I don't think we do enough of in our teaching, and that is confront values or motivate actions. And so last week I said, your lesson plan takes some time to be creative, to marinate in something so that you can be creative and choose the right recipe. And so this is just a list of ingredients you can think of it as. When I say confront values, what comes to mind? Right. Not just what, but why. And um, so we'll just go through this, and maybe you can add plenty. This isn't an exhaustive list, but just so if you have any questions as we go through, you can say, oh, I might use that, or how does that work? Uh, First one, question and answer. Brainstorming. What's brainstorming? Yeah, yeah, just throwing it out there. Everyone is going. A sermon, of course, a rank order. These are one of my favorite. I use these quite often. So we'll do one real quick. Right there on the right of in the blank, I want you to rank order of importance, the Ten Commandments. Okay, take 60 seconds. The Ten Commandments in order of importance. Yeah, there's 10 of them. So this assumes you know the 10 and that you can rank order them. On, they were on the school wall when most of us were in school. Only got one.
Get that one.
I was like, it's just
Yeah, there's an infinite number of wrong answers. All right, we'll take about 30 more seconds. You cheating? Well, you've already broken one and just cheating. You were getting ready to bear false witness. Okay. Let's see. We're going to start our list from the least important and go up to the most important. So, who has something in number 10 as the least important commandment? Keep the Sabbath. Okay. Another table, number 9 or 8. Take 9 or 8. Do not steal. Put that one. Another table. What's that? Okay. Covet. Where would that go? Okay. Mother and father. Number 5. This table. Okay. Murder. 4. Got another number 4. Oh, someone said covet up there. That's lying. That's the King James lying. Oh, someone I heard said the Lord's name in vain. That's up there. Okay, let's have another one. Idols. Adultery. It took a long time. And no other gods. Okay. So it's not easy, is it, to come up with 10 right off the cuff, unless you learned these as a kid through a song. And, jokingly, we can say, well, the ones you couldn't remember are probably the most recent ones you've broken. That's why I use this to, make people think through the 10 Commandments, because most people never thought through, how would I rank them? But what Bible verse might I be teaching if I were to use this as a hook? Something in the New, this is in Exodus, but there's something in the New Testament. Yeah, somebody comes up to Jesus and asks, of all the commandments, which one is the greatest? And then Jesus says what? Terry? Yeah, to love your neighbor as yourself. And I think Jacob, you started to write that down, or? Okay. Yeah, and hopefully that's what your mind went through, because it's like that question, I didn't tell you I was talking about Matthew 22, but this is a way to get to that. So this might be an example of a hook to have people rank order. Like, even if you knew them, it'd be challenging to say, uh, and I did this for years at colleges, and I used to cross references the married students versus the non-married students and how important adultery was. But um, so yeah, just a way to engage you and to make you think. Not just most of our questions are memorizing facts or recall, where these kinds of questions are again challenging your values. That's a rank order. A dilemma. It's a dilemma. Huh? Yeah, what to do? There's a famous one, Heinz, the German man Heinz. His wife needs a surgery. He's a Christian, but he's got to rob the store to get the money for her surgery. What does he do? So to be on the horns of a dilemma, have to make that decision. It challenges your. These are fun to do in youth group. I used to take all the kids and line them on a line. They'd have to stand on a line all the way down, and if I'd give them different dilemmas, and if they said yes, they'd go to this wall. No, they'd go to this wall. And so you see they're trying to, yeah, peer pressure is a big part of that, to see which way everybody's running. But to make means you have to physically move to one position or another. And of course, the other ones: mentoring, mission trips, service, prayer walks. 1 minute paper. In 1 minute, write down everything you know about something. A great discussion starter, because that gets everyone's thoughts out on paper, and then you spend the rest of the time organizing those. Or for my monopolizer, before we're on something, and it's like, okay, give me a one-sentence summary. Right, in one sentence, summarize your thoughts. For people that verbally process, that helps them to be able to get it all out on paper in one sentence. One of the most fun methods I used years ago when I was teaching a junior high Sunday school class of boys that were very rowdy. We were doing David and Goliath, and I said, we're going to write a newspaper article. This was back when we had newspapers, and these boys knew what that was, over David and Goliath. And so we need illustrations, an editor, and we need someone who knows about what's going on at that time, what kind of weaponry was used. And so these boys that are typically bouncing off the walls were all in the church library and Bible dictionaries trying to come up with their little portion of the article for the newspaper. And when we sold those newspapers, after they got them together, we printed them, and it was like a little mission fundraiser, and everyone was buying these little newspapers that the boys had put together. And so for some reason, their mind just, it gave them a challenge. Journaling, instructional games, we've done a Dear Diary entry, or if you're a guy, a log. Chain letter, anyone done a chain letter? Is that a high school thing? What's a chain letter of destiny? You don't? Y'all don't do? Okay. But yeah, like the spam, like I would write something about. No, not like that. No, not like that. We would go around. We would I've real yeah. I've really seen God show up in my life this week because, and I'd hand that paper next over, and then it would go all the way around, and by the end of it, we have like this giant praise prayer for the table. Doing a video. This is something that the younger generation with YouTube, you tell them to make a video on it, and they'll do it, because that's just something that in the old days wasn't as big of a deal, because you just made a video on a VHS and then you would tape over it later. But now that's something that they can share. Their testimony, which John was talking about, a panel discussion, mock interview. Anyone ever written a psalm? Write out your own psalm, your experiences with God. We have 150 of them in the Bible, and you can write your own that isn't inspired, but it can be a way to express your faith. Write song lyrics. I just added create a brochure. Phoebe did that last night. She had a history lesson. Create a brochure for joining the first church in the book of Acts. What would you write down to get people to consider joining the first church? Or scrapbooks, learning station. Those who work with little kids, what's a learning station? Hmm. Yeah, right. And you're kind of self-directed and going around to different stations. And that was always a children's thing, but years ago, a lot of worship leaders started doing things like that for different worship engagements. You would go over here and journal for a little bit, and then you would go over here and write a prayer, and people would just kind of float around that way. So it's an interesting thing that can be done. Of course, meditation, putting together a time capsule, the neighbor nudge we already talked about. Finish the story using stories, and you've written out the story. Um, I don't know if young people still have these, but we used to have choose your own adventure books. Y'all know what those are? Okay. Where you're reading a novel and it gets to the end and it's like, well, if you want to do this, go to page 82. And if you want to go to this, and so you can do those in Bible teaching, those little sessions of them. Puppets, of course, that's age appropriate. Case studies and simulation. We did a simulation, our leadership with Philemon a few months ago, where you had to become the character, and it can become a little emotional. Role play we just did, the quiz, the questionnaire, the skit, creative dialogue. If Jesus were to have a conversation with who? Pick someone famous. Arnold Schwarzenegger. What would he say? Yeah. Or, if Paul were to have a conversation with Donald Trump, what would he say? That they're just interesting. These again are engaging to get us in discussion. Yeah. 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 Mhm. This next one, a melodrama, which I used to use these a lot, again with junior high kids. Skits are very difficult. To pull off a skit or a play is challenging, but a melodrama is I would have a Bible story, I would assign parts, and then I would read the script. I'd be in complete control. And as I'm reading, they would act that out as I'm going. So it would be a Bible story. They'd be very engaged. And there used to be tons of youth group books on melodramas, or I've seen it done with adults well, to where people act out in real time as the story is being told. Comic book people do a storyboard. If you've ever seen the way movies are done, and especially animated movies, they're done with a storyboard. And sometimes I'll have people, hey, write out the story of Samson and Delilah in a comic book form, and they get to again write those out. And how would you summarize? You just have a little bubble between each one to write down what's going on. And it helps them to summarize long stories. And the rest of them, debate. I have to be careful with debate. I've never been able to pull it off well because people always get upset, especially in a church setting. List the top 10. I just had you do that. But if I said, list your top 10 fears, or your top 10 Bible verses, again, I could use this as a hook or to get you to engage in different ways. An object lesson. The newer ones, set a reminder in your phone. And so the phones have become a big way that there's all kinds of little polls that people take on phones. I've been to conferences where there's 600 people in the room, and we're polling in real time what the guy is talking about. And so some youth groups do that now to where they'll have a where they're engaging, or he can just go up and say, how many of you all think, and boom, on the screen right behind him there's there's some high tech stuff like that. Actually, it's pretty easy to do, but using the phone in a positive way. And Bible story reenactments. Now these next few that all have blanks, all those blanks are intentionally left blank. These are ones you would fill out as you teach. And these are questions that are designed either to hook people in, or in the look portion, when we're trying to have them internalize the truth, they would answer this. And these can go on and on. So what's the problem with, and whatever you're talking about, you just fill in, or define blank. In the heresy issue before, I might say, define this. A lot of times heresy is a definition of terms, miscommunication, so having people define things. If blank happened, I would. This next one is one of my favorites. I use it quite a bit. If blank is true, then I should, gets people to match up their actions to what they believe. Because by this time, we all know the right answer, but good teaching isn't just giving them the information, but making sure that they're going to act upon it. So if this is true, you should what? And it saves me from telling them what to do. They have to fill out that blank. The student fills out, oh, that's true. We all have enough excuses, so here's one that it's used often. What is keeping me from blank? And I deal with whatever excuse that is. Best and worst, and just so you can look through those. And then on the next page again, and you could probably sit and add another couple pages yourself. And they're very concise, and they really pinpoint, and they put the pressure on the student to produce something of value. Like that one at the top, if time and money were no object, I would what? What would your heart really chase after if time and money weren't on the table? If you want to read through those. And maybe as you're reading through, I'd love to hear another one, if you can think up another one, or a variation of one. Or any that stand out to you. Mhm. And again, one of the advantages of teaching, in my opinion, over preaching is that when I'm preaching, I'm trying to come up with examples, stories, illustrations, but good teaching puts that responsibility on the student, because in the group, if you come up with what your most excuse is, I can have a list of excuses that I talk about. But when you have to come up with it, you're much more likely to act upon something you come up with on your own. Then that last line, remember the method matches that one you do have, Philip. Yeah, the aim. That's the challenge. Method matches the aim. Sometimes you need something real simple. All right. Well, as we're coming to a close, we have one more week. And so next week, I would like us all to, you've been working on a verse. You've had a verse in mind the last 7 weeks. And the first 4 weeks, we dealt with how do you get to the author's intended meaning. So if you could write out, what is your verse? What's your scripture reference? What was the intended meaning in a sentence or two? How could you write a lesson aim for that? Students will blank by blank. How do you know they're doing it? And then have a hook, book, look, took, about 6 or 7 minutes. If you had a 6 or 7 minute to teach, what would that be? And so next time, we'll have some people get up and do those. But the rest of you that would like to just, come up with ideas about, if I was going to teach this verse, this would be an interesting hook. And maybe it's one of these questions on the page, something else you simmer and you try to be creative, and you get to the point of the passage and you help them look, internalize it, and how they're going to take accountability for it, and a little conclusion statement. We'll discuss around our tables next week. For those who aren't going to teach it to the whole class, you will take some time and just go around and teach it. But some of you, I would like for you to take 6, 7 minutes and just stand up for the class and just go through, do a little hook with us, tell us what the verse means, make us internalize it, apply it, and then have this little took at the end and conclude. And conclusions are challenging because we're Christians. Christians have the worst conclusions of any lessons. Why is that? Because, yeah. Because when we run out of stuff to say, we just pray. That's our conclusion. And so it is. I mean, prayer is great, but that's why most preachers, myself included, never think about good conclusions, because it's like, well, when I run out of stuff to say, Jeff knows to go to the stage when I start praying. So that's a challenge. But the conclusion, hopefully, it's like, wow, if they said anything else, it would just take away from their point, that it's clear. So, Gabriel will teach, right? He'll go. Well, who else at that table would like to stand up and teach next time? Just 5 or 6 minutes. Joe will do it. All right. So we can get a couple. Again, we'll only have time for 6, maybe. But yeah, Paul will. Paul will give us a little, because Paul's getting ready to help lead a group. Who else here would like to? You want to give it a shot? 5, 6 minutes? You, Jacob, you do it all the time, but if you feel like you do it, you can. Anyone else? Yeah, who else over here? Or back here, Terry, or anyone, Mount Moriah, like to do just a little verse, 5, 6 minutes? You're not being graded. It's just standing up and sharing. So I'll message everyone, see who would like to do it, and anyone else really aching to do it. All right. Well, I'll send out messages to you all, and we'll try to time it out. And again, it's just a practice, go through a passage, and it'll be a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun seeing how people think through things. And after people teach, it'll be like, wow, why'd you take that angle? Or how'd you go that direction? Or I never thought about it that way. All right. So next week will be our last session for this course, and then we'll see what's after that. I think Larry has something he's planning with some people, so we'll get on to that. And I don't have any other great conclusion other than that. So yeah, and I'll have Dale pray for us as a conclusion.